Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our fourth webinar introducing you to the new and updated standards. Thank you for spending your lunchtime with us. My name is Mary Catherine. I use the pronouns she, her, and I'm a physiotherapist and the manager of the practice advice team here at the college. I joined the college as a practice advisor in 2020. Prior to joining the college, I spent my career as a clinician in a variety of settings, including acute care and rehab hospitals, and spent the last 15 years as a clinician and clinic director of a multidisciplinary private practice. Kenya?
Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. It's really great to see you all here. My name is Evgenia. I also use the pronouns she, her, and I'm a policy analyst here at the college. I have been here since 2020. So right now we are at the policy team working closely alongside practice advice to review our standards of practice. And today in the background, we are also joined by a member of our communications team, Allison, who will be collecting your questions today and managing the Q&A function and dropping links into the chat as well. So today we will be talking about 3 new standards of practice. These are sometimes known as the business practice standards. So we've got the advertising and marketing standard, which came into effect on May 1st, and the documentation and funding fees and billing standards, which went into effect on August 1st. So as with our other standards webinar series, you will have the opportunity to send in your questions through the Q&A function throughout the presentation. We'll be taking time to answer your questions at the end of each standard, but do feel free to type in your questions as they might come up. And now, before we begin, I'll turn it back over to MC to present our land acknowledgement statement.
Thanks, Evgenia. We would like to first ground our presentation with a land acknowledgement. I identify as someone with heritage in Ireland and Scotland. I acknowledge the privilege and benefits that I hold as a result of colonial structures, and I commit to ongoing learning and reconciliation. We would like to acknowledge with respect that the land we are meeting on is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. These lands are now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. We also recognize that the meeting place of Toronto, traditionally known as Tikka Toronto, is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit and is within the lands of the Dish with One Spoon Covenant. We would like to encourage you to reflect on the lands you call home and how you came to inhabit them, and on the Indigenous communities who have a traditional kinship with these lands. Those of you joining from outside of the Toronto area are encouraged to learn more about the traditional keepers of your territory.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Wonderful. All right, so I'd like to do a little bit of an overview before we launch into the actual standards of practice. So first, I do want to highlight when we talk about standards of practice, it's very important to think of them not just as rules that are kind of handed down from up above, but really at their core, something that is developed by and for the physiotherapy profession. So the standards really reflect the expectations and values that physiotherapists like all of you believe are essential for safer patient care, for a more effective practice, and of course, for the preservation of the public interest at large. Our role then at the college is to take those collective insights and bring them together, formalize them, so writing them down into standards, and then sharing them back with you in a clear and practical way that makes sense for all of the practices. So the consultation process is something that we really rely on to do this work, to really find the right balance between what serves the public interest and what's actually workable in a day-to-day practice. Every time we consult, your feedback is presented directly to our board, and they're very responsive to making changes that are driven by the consultation and all your collective voices. So I suppose this is just my plug, and a big thank you for those of you who participated throughout the process, or just those of you who have shared your thoughts with us via our practice advice or other services. So where does this take us today? As you might know, we're aligning 16 of a national package of standards called the Model Standards of Practice with our practice environment here in Ontario. While those standards already set out some expectations that are common across the entire country, we do use the consultations, we do use your engagement to really make sure that these expectations are fit for purpose in Ontario. And that is what we're doing for this package of standards and all of our national standards adoption today. is really just to make sure that everything that the national standards have are then being reflected on and validated by all of you. So we're tailoring 16 of these standards to fit our context and regulatory framework. And this is a process that should actually wrap up by the end of the year. We also have guidance documents that elaborate on the expectations in those standards, and we are developing new guidance to align with the updated standards in an ongoing way. So making sure that everything is very current as we're going about our work. Okay, so very quickly before we dive in, we're first going to be launching a quick poll. So if we can get the poll up on the screen now. And this is just, have you commented on these 3 standards when they went out for consultation in November of 2024 until September? So I know this was a long time ago, and I personally cannot believe that more than a year has already passed by. But let's just have some on the screen here. Okay, perfect. Thank you so much, everybody, for responding. The results are up. And thank you for submitting it. And for those of you who have participated, if you missed it, that is completely okay too. There will be opportunities to comment on more standards and policies that come up in the future if you're ever interested. Okay, so now we can officially dive into the 4th group of standards. Let's go. Okay, and we'll begin with the advertising and marketing standard, which has replaced the college's previous advertising standard. So the purpose of this standard is that physiotherapists' advertising, marketing, and promotional activities are true, accurate, and verifiable. And the outcome for patients is that they can understand and trust that physiotherapy services and products are promoted honestly, which would ultimately help them make informed decisions about where to seek care. In terms of the key performance expectations, these really are overall similar to the previous standard, but this time elaborated on in a little bit more detail. The expectations first highlight that physiotherapists should only advertise services that they are competent to provide. They must review all advertising and marketing done on their behalf to make sure that it is truthful, accurate, and verifiable, and taking reasonable steps to document and correct any errors that they might find in those advertisements. The standard then outlines some guardrails to prevent the public from being misled when it comes to how physiotherapists actually label the types of services that they're offering. So this includes claiming a practice focus unless it is a genuine and significant part of their practice, in which case it would be permissible. As well, physiotherapists must not use the term specialist or imply that they are a specialist of something. It is not a protected title by law, but the college does approve certain specialty designations. So if you hold one of those designations, you would be able to use the title specialist, and more information about that piece specifically can be found in the college's title standards and the related resources associated with that standard. So next, the standard goes into advertising content, so how those services are marketed. It highlights that when preparing their advertising, physiotherapists must not encourage unnecessary services or products through the use of incentives, for example, make unproven claims, guarantees, or unrealistic promises. They must not claim the uniqueness, special advantage, or superiority of something without real evidence to support that claim. Or they must also not disparage or undermine other providers or clinics. Physiotherapists must also not endorse physiotherapy-related products for financial gain, unless that product is really supported by credible evidence and with the full transparency about any financial relationship. So just a caveat about endorsing physiotherapy-related products specifically. It then goes into bundled service packages. So if you're advertising those, the standard clearly states that you must clearly state which services are included in that bundled package, that the services could be purchased individually, and that refunds are available for unused services. And this is consistent with how it's worded in the funding, fees, and billing standard for offering those services in general. We can go into that a little bit more. And then the final part of the standard is that when advertising free services, physiotherapists must clearly explain any conditions or limitations that those services might come with, and that the advertisements can be to offer or highlight pro bono options for people experiencing financial hardship, or in promotion of general education and awareness. So if you're advertising for free services, just some guardrails to keep in mind there. Okay, so with that, I will now hand it over to MC to take us through what might be new when it comes to this standard.
Thanks, Evgenia. So a couple of things that are new in this standard. One, of course, the name has been updated. But so by including the term marketing in the standard, it should be clearer for physiotherapists to consider this guidance in all types of promotional materials or activities done on their behalf. So this will include print and online advertising, of course, but also social media posts, promotional activities such as booths at fitness events, and any other type of marketing. The other new aspect in this guidance is regarding this concept of free assessments. As Evgenia noted, a physiotherapist should only advertise free physiotherapy services, such as offers of free consultations or assessments, or free trials of a clinically indicated physiotherapy treatment in a manner that either promotes the general education or health awareness, informs the public about conditions or limitations related to the physiotherapy services that are offered, and highlights pro bono services offered to patients experiencing financial hardship. Now, a reminder that the cost of a service, whether it's discounted or free, does not change your responsibility to ensure that it meets your professional standards. A free assessment must still be a fulsome assessment. It should still meet the requirements of the assessment, diagnosis, and treatment standard. We now have specific guidance related to endorsements. So if you use your physiotherapy title to endorse a product, you must meet professional obligations and ensure your role as a physiotherapist is not compromised. As a physiotherapist, when endorsing a product and using your title, you have to ensure it's done within your scope of practice and backed by evidence. Your opinion should be unbiased, free from conflicts of interest, and you must disclose any compensation as a result of the endorsement. Finally, this new standard addresses the topic of incentives and allows them as long as they do not promote unnecessary service. So an example might be if you were offering a free iPad in exchange for a patient booking 20 follow-up appointments, that would not be allowed because there's no necessary, you wouldn't know ahead of time if that person would need those, and you don't want to have somebody book appointments just so that they can get an iPad. But it might be okay, for example, to have a draw for a free physiotherapy product in your clinic that's not linked to the number of times a patient comes to the clinic for care. Now, testimonials continue to be allowed. They were allowed in the previous standard. They're still allowed as long as they are accurate, verifiable, and not paid for. So a common question that we had related to this standard was around this concept of how do we know, most physios know they can't use the term specialist and then unless they have completed that specialty training that's recognized by the college and it's approved and it's on the public register. So this standard guides us, though, that if we have a specific focus in our practice, we can use that in the description of our care, and it should accurately reflect that your practice is primarily focused or has a majority of patients seen in this area of care. Another question we got around this standard is, can I use real patients in my social media promotions? So can I use patients, for example, in the online clinic posts on Instagram, for example? I think this question is best rephrased as, should I use real patients in advertising and marketing? So physios are guided to consider issues of boundaries, conflicts of interest, and consent when considering using patients in advertising and marketing materials. As you know, physiotherapists must always maintain professional boundaries with their patients. The college's boundary violation standard requires that physiotherapists always act in the patient's best interest to manage boundaries in the therapeutic relationship. Patients who are currently undergoing treatment may perceive that they're being pressured to participate in photos or videos for your advertising, and they don't want to risk jeopardizing their current treatment with you. So a safer choice could include either waiting for a patient who perhaps has completed their treatment and you're discharging them before asking them to participate, or choosing to use a colleague instead of a real patient in your advertising. Another consideration is whether it's in the physiotherapist's best interest to have a patient in the promotion, or is it in the patient's? Typically, it is seen as the patient doing the physio a favor, and that could put the physiotherapist at risk for a conflict of interest. Ultimately, you can use images of patients, either photos or videos, if they provide their consent and you feel that you can preserve that professional boundary. The videos and images should always ensure patient privacy and dignity. So consider concealing a patient's face if possible so that they're not easily identified. When you are obtaining permission to use a patient in videos, you want to make sure that the patient understands what they're consenting to, who could potentially see that video or have access, that you've discussed and they understand the public nature of videos being posted, and that they understand that things posted on websites and social media can be copied and distributed by others. You should definitely document this consent conversation that you've had with your patient. And then finally, we had some questions about what the term promotional really means or promotion means. And there you will find a definition for promotional activities along with other definitions that help to clarify the standard at the bottom of the standard. So these promotional activities include any effort that's made by an individual physiotherapist or their business to communicate with potential patients. So promotional activities will likely serve to inform about available products and services and prices. This might include either personal, direct selling, direct marketing, advertising, sales promotion, publicity, public relations, and social media presence. I see that. Thank you for submitting your questions. These are great. There's a question around bundled offers. So yes, there is guidance in this standard as well as a previous standard around bundled guidance. And it includes details around making sure that patients understand what they're buying, that they have the ability to be refunded for sessions that aren't used, and they are always available to also purchase separately. So people shouldn't be kind of forced into buying 5 or none. There's another question around, can physios give general information about any condition? No, not any condition. Physiotherapists should keep their information within the scope of practice of physiotherapists in Ontario. And finally, another question around discounts. So could a clinic promote a limited time discount for an initial assessment? And the answer is yes, you can definitely do that. An important piece around that discount is that you'll want to include that the invoice accurately reflects what that patient has paid. And we'll have further details around kind of fees and funding when we review the funding fees and billing standard coming up in just a few minutes. And then lastly, there's a question around, can we use phrases like helping hundreds of patients recover from back pain? We can only really make claims if they're verifiable. So you would need to ensure if there's anything that's included in your advertisements that you have evidence that shows that this is verifiable and this is practical evidence. So it would be up to you to prove that should a complaint come in about your advertisement. Shouldn't be misleading, should be accurate, should be verifiable. So kind of repetitive in terms of the guidance, but this is important guidance to make sure that patients are protected. Okay. So without any more questions, I think we're ready to move on to the next standard.
Amazing.
Over to you.
Yeah, thank you so much. So yep, we are moving on to the documentation standard, and this is a new version of the college's previous record keeping standard. So the purpose here is for physiotherapists to maintain accurate, legible, and complete patient records that are written in a timely manner. And the outcome for patients is that they expect that their records are kept confidential, that they are accurate, complete, and retrievable, and that they essentially reflect the physiotherapy services provided. Now, moving on to the performance expectations, here we first highlight the general obligations to keep records confidential, accurate, complete, and legible in either English or French. They must also be completed in a timely manner, and this could mean a few different things, but we want to make sure that patients are supported and that clinical care is effectively being upheld. So next, the standard lists clinical details that must be included as part of a patient record. And there are a few things to really go through in there, maybe a few less than the previous record keeping standard. But really, this includes, but isn't limited to, things like the patient's history and why they're there, documentation about informed consent, relevant assessment and treatment notes, and discharge summaries. So the relevant details of the clinical care, there are a few more of those notes in the standard, but really those are the main highlights. The standard also outlines what should be included as part of financial record keeping, so your financial records. And this includes things like who provided the care, where the care was provided, fees for a physiotherapy product or a service, and this could include any interest charges or discounts that you might provide, any payment information, and balance owing. So details related to the financial transactions or the billing portion of care, that would be considered your financial record keeping. Documentation quality is also something that the standard talks about. So what quality means is to really make sure, not to sound like a broken record, but they are accurate, not unnecessarily duplicated if you're working in a collaborative care space, for example, that they are essentially understandable by somebody who might need to access the record. So an example the standard gives is to make sure that any abbreviations are either provided for in the records themselves, or you can access sort of a list of abbreviations that might be used. So there's a continuity of care there. And finally, that any changes or additions to the record are clearly marked while making sure the original entry is still retrievable if it needs to be. So the record retention rules are the same as before. So this is really just a 10-year retention period in most cases for adult patients. There are some exceptions to that, which would be noted in the standard and resources. And finally, physiotherapists must ensure that electronic records are traceable and can be restored, and that physiotherapists in general know that the use of electronic record keeping does not alter any of their obligations, either that are outlined in this standard or in any of the other rules that physiotherapists should follow. Okay, so with that, I'll turn it back over to MC to talk about how this all might work, all these changes, how they might be reflected in clinical practice.
Thanks, Evgenia. So just to keep you on your toes, we have another name change in standards. It's gone from the record keeping standard to the documentation standard. A reminder of some of the items that used to be in the record keeping standard are now found in the assessment diagnosis treatment standard. So shout out to one of the other new standards. All that information is now found there. That clarification that records must be retrievable is a new one for this standard. This is particularly relevant, as Evgenia said, if you're using electronic medical records in cloud storage. Also particularly notable if you are providing care virtually on behalf of a third party. So always ask a potential employer, who is the health information custodian with this organization, how are the records held, and how to access if a patient requests a copy. You should also ensure that they know to uphold your professional obligations regarding the retention requirements. As Evgenia mentioned, if care is provided virtually, it must be noted in the record. So this is a requirement of the standard. And the other requirement is around parameters of treatment. They must be included in the treatment plan. Of course, this is a safety piece, and it makes it easier for another physiotherapist to take over the care of your patient in a seamless way if needed. So some questions that have come in around the documentation standard. One question is, do I have to document all communication with patients? The answer is no. You need to include any communication with patients that relates to their condition or clinical care that was given around the physiotherapy, around your physiotherapy care. So examples might include things like, I feel better, or an email that says, my pain was aggravated after the last session, or I'm going to move my appointment to next week to give myself more time to practice my home exercises. That kind of information is relevant to what you're going to do at the next visit, why maybe if there was a plan to be seen weekly and now that's moving to bi-weekly, why that was changed. You don't need to include or record information that isn't about their care. So for example, if they're asking about how to fill out an insurance form or where to buy a recommended brace, you don't need to include a copy of that email. So things that should be included are things like the dates of all treatment sessions and professional interactions, including declined, missed, or canceled appointments. That is because it might show a pattern of that attendance pattern might give insight into the patient's condition and may affect the outcomes of care. Remember that any kind of advice or that relevant communication around patient education should also be included, because it could affect what the plan looks like going forward. And then lastly, any patient safety incidences or near misses should also be included. And so recording these will help you and others prevent future issues. So as an example, if a patient falls, that should always be included in their record. But if a patient almost falls off, for example, the stationary bike when they were getting off, it's important that you document that and note what safety steps you're going to take in the future to help prevent that from actually happening. So for example, a recommendation that there needs to be a person to assist during the dismount. Another question that has come in a few times is around this concept of a collaborative care model or a multi-professional model, and can we use information collected from other healthcare providers? And the answer is yes. You can include findings made by other health professionals or information reported by patients or substitute decision makers. This information should be recorded accurately, and it should include a reference to the source of that information. And so physiotherapists can reference rather than duplicate information collected by someone else, as long as you confirm that this information is current and accurate, and that the information is accessible to the person reading the record as needed. So, for example, if you are referring to the medical history that was taken by the physician that's also working on the team, you can refer back to that medical history, but it needs to also be accessible. So we recognize that combined patient records can improve communication and prevent duplication and promote safe and quality care. So the standard for this documentation standard will remain the same, whether it's you're providing solo care or you're in a team environment. You can use a resource on the college website called the documentation checklist, which can be really helpful to see if your records and kind of your process, particularly if you're in this multi-practitioner model, meets the documentation standard. And Allison is going to share that link for the checklist in our chat now. And then another question that comes in frequently regarding this standard is, does the college require a consent form? And many of you on the call will remember that no, the college does not require a consent form. They want to, the college wants to make sure that we remember that consent is a conversation and that there should always be evidence of the conversation documented. You want to be sure to include any specific questions or approaches that were discussed, and anything that was decided upon or decided to omit. And you can find examples of how to document consent in the consent resource on the college website. And Allison is also going to link all of us to that now. And finally, we have had many questions related to the use of AI Scribe software. Whether you use an AI Scribe software or you're going old school on pen and paper, you must still meet this standard. So if you're considering using a type of software or scribe program, You must ensure that the program meets the privacy requirements for personal health information in Ontario as set out in the PHIPAA legislation. The college has developed principles for you to review and apply when you're considering implementing AI into any aspect of your patient care. And Allison is also going to link that guidance for you in the chat now. So I'm just going to have a look at some of the questions that have come in. Yes, there's a recording of this meeting. There's a question about that. And there's a question around, do we have to include a referral in SOAP? So if you have a referral from another practitioner, you should definitely keep it in the patient's record. That should be included there. And there's a question around if there is a situation that we need to give patient discounts for to treat. The college doesn't force discounts, and so we recommend that you have an ethical framework around how you decide to use and provide discounts. We have had questions around if a patient chooses to or requests a discount because of financial hardship, that you don't specifically ask for proof that they're having financial hardship, as this could affect boundaries in the patient care. In the question, there's another question around what is the best mode for communicating with patients? And that depends. Many people, of course, if you're seeing people in person, prefer to be communicated with in person. So if there's a situation where you need to have a conversation with them and you're not sure if they communicate effectively via phone and they are not computer literate, then you may want to wait and have this conversation with them one-on-one. If you are communicating with patients, you can ask them how they prefer to be communicated with. If you're, I would say the riskiest form of communication would be text messaging. Text messaging is difficult to make copies of and include in the patient record. And it also means that that person, it's harder to make professional boundaries of when a text message comes in and when it's accessed versus perhaps an email. So email tends to be effective if you have a ready-made copy of that communication. Certainly phone calls will need to be summarized in a written form, and that the phone call and the nature of the phone call documented. So people are left to choose which is the most effective communication method for them. Great questions. I love the engagement. Great. It's really, I love being able to connect with everyone and kind of flush out some of these questions in real practical scenarios. So keep the questions coming. They're great. Okay, Genia, over to you.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. And if we have no more questions, we do another engagement activity just for a quick break before we dive into our last standard. Again, there is no right or wrong answer, but which standard do you return to most often in your practice? And I see that the poll is launched now. So is it advertising because transparent and honest messaging is important? Is it documentation because you know that if it's not written down, it didn't happen? Or is it fees because you like your fees and billing practices to not come with any surprises? I'll just give it a couple of moments for everybody to respond. And whenever the majority rolls in, we can show the results if we can. Maybe we can, yeah, let's showcase the results of that one. Okay, that's amazing. So documentation pretty overwhelmingly is your go-to standard. And I guess that kind of makes sense to me. There's a lot of useful information in there. And we also want to ensure that our records are accurate and well maintained. So amazing. Great to know. Thank you everybody for participating. And now we can officially get into our last standard of the day, which is the funding, fees, and billing standard. And this one has replaced the college's previous standard on fees, billings, and accounts. So very similar name. The purpose is to ensure physiotherapists ensure that the fees charged for physiotherapy services and products are transparent, justifiable, and not excessive. And this is really to enable patients to make informed choices, which takes us to the outcome, which is that patients should be able to expect that the fee schedules and billing practices for physiotherapy services and products are transparent, justifiable, and clearly communicated to them before they are subject to any fees. So like we said in the poll, no surprises. Now, about the key performance expectations here. So the first one to keep in mind is really that physiotherapists are responsible for all billing under the registration number. And this is not new, and I'm sure everybody is familiar with this one. And the standard also highlights that this also includes, like that responsibility part also includes taking reasonable steps to correct and document any errors that you identify in your practice, which you might notice is very similar to the expectations in the new advertising and marketing standard. Next, physiotherapists must understand the funding streams that could apply to their patients. So you don't have to know every single funding stream, but if it's relevant to the patient, the standard says you should be aware of what those funding streams might look like, such as third-party payers, for example, and also follow the relevant policies and procedures. The standard then highlights that patients should have a clear fee schedule available to them before any fees are charged at all. And this should cover things like assessment and treatment fees, fees for providing copies of records, other administrative fees like cancellation and late fees, and refund policies, though of course this is not an exhaustive list of all the fees that could possibly apply. Any departure from the fee schedule that is set can only be to reduce fees, such as provide discounts, for example, and never to increase them. And this is a provision that we copied directly from the previous standard as well. So nothing new here. The standard then talks about providing invoices and receipts. So these should be provided to patients or payers pretty quickly, reasonable time frame, and detail the fees charged, who provided the care, and any terms of payment. It is important that non-physiotherapy services are not billed as physiotherapy, if that's the title that you are using, on any invoice or receipt, and that the patient understands all the fees that are charged. So next, physiotherapists must also regularly review their fees and billing practices to ensure that fees are reasonable and that billings are accurate. And the college does have a resource up on our website to help you approach this review process. And maybe Allison can help me drop the link in the chat as well. So just some guidance around how that review could look like. And finally, we talked about bundled care in the advertising standard. So that was about advertising the bundled care that you might be offering. Now, this standard actually talks about offering that bundled care. So very similarly, physiotherapists must establish some safeguards for bundled service provision, such as allowing patients to purchase one service at a time, providing refunds for unused portions of the services, and issuing receipts only after services are delivered. Okay, and with that, and for the final time today, I'll turn it over to MC to talk us through how you might apply these expectations in your practice.
Great. Thank you, Evgenia. Okay, we have another name change, a little bit different. So it's now called the Funding, Fees, and Billing Standard. And it's great because it does kind of include that concept of funding. Of course, we don't expect physiotherapists to be aware of all funding models across the continuum of care across the whole province, but there is an expectation for you to understand relevant funding models. So for example, if you work in outpatient orthopedics in a private practice, you should be aware that there is public funding for the rehabilitation of patients who are undergoing total hip or total knee replacements in the bundled care model, and advise patients to steer them towards that information. The other piece around this standard, I would say, that feels new, that there are clear expectations of having the fee schedule accessible prior to receiving services. Nobody likes a surprise. Patients don't like a surprise of how much things are going to cost. So making sure that they know ahead of time the expectations around what things will cost is very, very helpful and is required now in this standard. And with regards to identifying billing errors, an addition from the previous standard is to make sure that we document not just simply that we've identified a billing error, but also what action was taken, what was the outcome of that action. A couple of things that aren't new from this standard that were also in the previous standard and in alignment with that standard is that the names of anyone else who has provided some or all of the care during the session should be included. So the PT assistant's name and title must be included, and a physiotherapy student who you are supervising and has provided hands-on care should also be included in that invoice. As Evgenia mentioned, any departure from the fee schedule must only be to reduce fees. And this is consistent with what was there previously. So an interesting question I thought that came in around this was how do you share a fee schedule without a physical location? It makes a lot of sense. We have fee schedules posted in the clinics themselves, in the treatment rooms, perhaps, or in the waiting area. But what if you don't have a waiting area? What if you were providing virtual care or you're providing home care? How do you make sure that a patient has access to the fee schedule? So this touches a little bit on that question that we just had around what's the best way to communicate with a patient. But consider how patients are going to most easily access things that you send them. So it could be in an email, could be also posted on your website. It could be something that's added to their intake forms. Be consistent with how you're providing this information and ask patients for feedback regarding how they would like to receive it. Another common question around the standard is how do we do a billing audit? So we know that physiotherapists, that we have to make sure registration numbers are used correctly for billing, that there is an expectation that physiotherapists check the fees, bills, and accounts regularly and keep the evidence that they're doing these checks. The goal is really to make sure that the fees are accurate and fair and that the bills and accounts are correct. So during that review, the physiotherapist should check that the invoice matches the patient's file and that that information is correct, including the patient's name, the physiotherapist's name, the registration number, the date of the service or when the service was provided and the product that was provided and the costs associated. If mistakes happen, so if mistakes are found, when mistakes are found, take reasonable steps to fix them and record what was found, the action that you took, and the result of this. And so this review it's up to you how you want to do this review. It could happen weekly, and you take a percentage of people that you saw that week and review it. It could be in accordance with your paycheck. So maybe if you get billed every 2 weeks, you're reviewing that information. If you're starting a new job at a clinic, ask the clinic owner how you will be able to regularly review your billing. Explain to them that you are responsible for billing using your registration number. If you are interviewing, considering working at a clinic where they do not agree for you to have a process to review your billing, they're likely not allowing you to meet your professional obligations. So it might not be a good fit for you to be working there. So consider we do have examples of how to do billing audits in the resource section of this standard, and Allison will link us to that now. We're getting questions today, and we got questions submitted around, can I provide a discount? Absolutely. Physiotherapists can choose to provide a discount or even waive the fee for patients. You want to always document the amount and the reason for the discount in the patient's chart. And very critically, you want to make sure that your invoice accurately reflects the amount charged to the patient. So if your fee schedule has posted that your treatment costs $100 and you know that this person has expressed some financial difficulty and you said, I'm going to take $20 off for you, that your invoice should show that they are paying $80. It should not show that they're paying $100. So another question that came in around fees and billing is who is responsible for making sure that patients understand the fees for the physio care. Of course, physiotherapists are responsible for making sure that patients understand the fees and billing practices. You can, of course, train administrative and support staff to help you with this, but ultimately it will be your responsibility. And these are outlined in this standard. So a clear explanation and consider using straightforward language and simplified processes so that they understand. Sometimes patients understand better when things are written down. So it could be to your benefit to also have a written process for how a program or how fees are going to be applied. So this could include things like the equipment that's needed, copies of the records, the fees and policies around bundled services, and any fees that might be associated with cancellation charges or late fees. And those were the questions that were submitted ahead of time. And now I see that Allison is managing some questions for us around this standard specifically. So there's a question around how long should we keep the record of our billing audits? That's a great question. I would say generally you don't have to keep the results of them. If you're asked about it, the college will often ask, what is your process? And so you want to demonstrate that you have a process. So there isn't a specific requirement of how long you have to keep your billing audits. If you find fraud is done by a clinic owner, who do you report to? So there is guidance on the college website in the resource section called Inappropriate Business Practices, and it has steps to follow if you have identified fraud. You will want to send a letter to the fraud includes use of or misuse of your registration number. You'll want to send a letter to the professional conduct team here at the college. Their email address is investigations@collegept.org, and you'll want to include the details around what you know, how your registration number was misused, how many patients it might have involved, and there's other details there for you, so you can have a look at that. There's a question around, do we need to provide a list of all fees before assessment and treatment, or can we simply have it available and visual to our patients on our website? So I would say that you need to provide a full fee schedule available to patients on the website. If you're only providing a list at the time of assessment, and for example, a patient's coming in because there was a discounted assessment that suited them, it would be important for them to know whether or not they would also be able to afford ongoing treatment at the clinic, and if that is somewhere that's appropriate for them. So the recommendation is for patients to have access to a fee schedule before providing and receiving care. Another question around putting mileage on an invoice for patients if you're doing home care and in private care. Your invoices have to be transparent. So if part of the invoice, part of the fee that you're charging is for mileage, then this should be transparent on the invoice, is the recommendation. And that looks like all of the questions right now. I know that there were a lot that came in earlier. Evgenia, do you have anything to add to any of those questions? Did I miss anything policy-wise?
I think that you covered it all. Yep, and I see that the resources are posted as well, so those should be available, but nothing to add from me. I think that was perfect. Yeah. Do we
Okay.
have any more questions coming through?
Yeah, so there's another
do?
question that comes back to the documentation standard. So if a physiotherapist makes an error in documentation, what is the correct way to correct it? So mistakes happen again. If there's a correction that has to happen, the original entry has to remain there so that you don't delete it, you don't cross it out. The original entry remains. You can add a note, easily done with paper, and a lot of the EMR software also easily allows an addendum. So you would include a note around what information you're correcting, why you're correcting it. It should be clear the date of the correction and who is providing that information of the correction. A question around software that doesn't allow to include a PTA name in billing. there has to be evidence that the PTA, so your invoice itself from the clinic or from your business can allow that. If a third-party payer doesn't necessarily allow that, that's their software. There's nothing that you can do as a PT around that, but your documentation must include it. A question around friends and family discount and how this can happen, or old age discounts or low income discounts or low income discounts. So again, this concept of we can discount patient care, patient treatment, document the reason around it, create a framework, a process around it so that you can ensure fair and equitable access to your care would be the recommendations around how to provide those types of discounts. There's a question around the timeliness of documentation. If I enter my notes 2 weeks later but date it, I mean, of course, the concept or the desire to have accurate and the importance of having accurate documentation is in the standard because it's about patient safety. The longer you delay entering information into your chart, the less likely it is that your information is accurate and can affect the accuracy and the progression of care. So it's always better to enter your information sooner rather than later. And particularly the dating of when it was entered in electronic medical records. There are fingerprints around when things are entered. And so the recommendation is to get that documentation finished. It's signed, close the note on the day that you see that patient. What kind of data are we sent to insurance and consent required? Oh, so this is a question around sending information to insurers. So many of us working in private practice have received requests for audits from third-party payers or insurers around when a patient attends. We are required to provide this information to insurers. Patients will have consented to sharing information with the insurer as a prerequisite to receiving funding for their care. And so it is recommended that you comply with insurers' requests to confirm or identify which dates and what type of care was provided. And you can keep a record of that audit and that confirmation of your compliance with the insurer in the patient's record. There is a question around changing clinics and software and whether or not the college is aware of any approved tools or apps where we can securely store records. So this is really the questions around secure storage comes back to the personal health information and protection. It's the privacy policy, and that is governed by the Information and Privacy Commissioner in Ontario. So they have guidance for you around secure storage. They're having to have, for example, two-factor authentication, a double method of storage, whether it's a locked door in a locked cabinet, if it's physical storage, or whether it's password protected, and two-factor authentication for safety. So you can look to the Information and Privacy Commissioner to see if they have specific tools or apps. Typically, if a tool or app is PHIPAA compliant, it will say so in the back end of the software, or you can always approach and confirm with the applicant, the application's developer, whether or not it has been PHIPAA approved at this point. And then another question is around the level of detail required in our notes. So the level of detail that's required is the consideration around how would you be able to, what's needed for you to have a full clinical picture? If I'm taking over the care for you, for this patient, is it clear what the clinical reasoning is? Is your plan available for me to be able to take over if you're missing? Are there enough details in there for me to take over the care for this patient? So that would be the level of detail that's typically required in the notes so that someone else can take over the care of that person should it be required. There's a question around, can care provided by a PTA be provided at a lesser rate than care provided by a physiotherapist? So as you know, the college does not set the fees for physiotherapy care. You have the ability to set fees as you see appropriate, as long as they are not excessive. And it is, again, it's posted on the fee schedule ahead of time for patients to see that. There is a question around providing reports and charging for time if you have to produce a report. So if there's a request for evidence of when a patient has attended and confirmation of visits that support the funding and fees, then that report should be provided without a cost. If someone is asking you for a report that could potentially take you a lot of time, the advice would be that before you spend the time on the report, that you confirm with that insurer what the report is and how much time that would cost, and whether or not that you are charging a fee for that report. So that would be a conversation to have between yourself and the insurer. And finally, there's a question around, can we barter with a patient about fees? So bartering, as I understand it, would be a trade. So for example, if we have a patient who, let's say they're also a hairstylist, and they are saying, well, you know what, if you come and see me for a haircut, I will come and see you for my sore elbow, and then we don't have to charge fees. So we don't have a rule specifically that prohibits bartering, but the concept of bartering can really introduce issues with professional boundaries, and it can really introduce questions around potential conflicts of interest. So the boundaries that I would want you to consider would be things like the type of conversation you're going to have in the physio appointment should not be referencing what that person is doing for you. So for example, when a patient is with us in the appointment, our attention is always on the patient. There should be no discussion about, you know, what I'm thinking about doing with my hair at the next appointment, or um, other ideas that are focused on me as the therapist. The focus should always be on the patient. The other consideration is around whether or not that patient would still feel empowered to tell you that they're getting worse, or that treatment's not helping. And they don't feel like they can go to see someone else because now you're coming to see them for your haircut. So there's nothing that outright prevents a bartering, but it is something that really should be discussed and considered. If there is a situation that would bring that on, I would recommend giving Samira and I a call at Practice Advice. That's a little plug for the Practice Advice service. Evgenia, we've got a slide that has our contact information, but I would definitely recommend giving us a call and having a conversation with us around the specifics, and we can guide you more specifically around what to consider. Okay, with that, I'm mindful of time. We've got a wrap-up question for you. Evgenia, take it away.
All right. Yeah, thank you so much. That was a lot of answering questions, MC. You are a rock star. So as for our wrap-up poll, we just want to know, what is your reaction to the new standards? So having reviewed these today and submitted some questions, are we feeling a little bit confused? Are we feeling neutral because there's not a lot that's new? Are we feeling a little bit frustrated because there's a lot of expectations, you have to work them into your day? Or is there some optimism here? So we see how these are maybe improved, how they can serve the public and strengthen our profession. Okay, so we'll give it a few seconds for the responses to come in. And once the majority lands somewhere, then we can share the results of these polls. Okay. Okay, we have some optimism. I appreciate that. It's amazing to see so much optimism. Thank you for sharing. As I've said in webinars before, your optimism gives me optimism, and we're going to be hoping to sustain the positive outlook as we further dig into the guidance and to the rest of our standards work. Some frustration. Of course, if anything is difficult, we do have another plug for the practice advice service coming up, and some neutrality, which makes a lot of sense because maybe this doesn't add any extra burden, and really these standards are not brand new standards. So neutrality is very fair and to be expected. Here are our two wonderful practice advisors. So the college's practice advice service is a free and anonymous service, and they are here to help you with any questions that might come up outside of this webinar. MC and Samira are both very friendly and very knowledgeable physiotherapists who are an amazing resource for any questions that are related to your practice. And to close off for today, I just wanted to extend a huge thank you to all of you for being here during your lunch and for all of the great questions and engagement. That really blew me away. So the feedback you continue to share across the standards are very helpful for us. And I do want to echo MC's earlier thoughts that it's amazing to engage with all of you on the important issues. It helps us to understand how you guys are feeling and where to focus our resources. MC, would you like to share some words of conclusion?
Thanks so much, and we look forward to you joining us at the next one. Take care.
Okay. Thank you, everybody.